Hi, I'm Carrie Penny, and on this episode of Secret Heart Broadcasting, I'll be speaking with Janine Violini. Janine and Jamie Whitaker run a program called Crows in a Row, and what they do is educate people about the impermanence of life and planning for the inevitable end. So if you have questions about wills, or letting people know what your wishes are when you're gone, or you even want to start having those conversations, then this episode is for you. Okay, we're kind of into the realm of, what we believe. And when you're doing the work with Crows in a Row and someone comes to you and says, I think, should we have a will? You were talking about that being an entry point, but yeah, I guess my question is we should all have a will, right?
Yeah. So most of our work when we're doing the Crows in a Row program as it stands is storytelling. So we, for us, you can go to any lawyer and many are so wonderful. There's many we recommend, and we always recommend you go to one after us. But we call sort of our work in it beyond the paperwork. So it's I would say it's not like we invented any of this. Death has been happening, I think, for a little bit now. And
this just in.
Yeah, exactly. And so, of course, there's great wise teachers all throughout history who've done death well. And for Jamie and I, it's just a reminder for people who maybe haven't had that exposure to look at things slightly differently. Lucy Kalanithi is Dr. Lucy Kalanithi. Her husband, Paul, had the book When Breath Becomes Air, and he died young as a doctor, and she finished the book. She has a beautiful TED Talk, and one of her lines in the TED Talk is, the paperwork, it's the hard, it's hard stuff, but it's the stuff. And she spoke to it about being a renewal of vows, like, will you speak for me when I can no longer speak for myself? Will you make sure that, my legacy or anything that I earned monetarily or materialistically in this world is given to the places where I want it to go, and will you be my spokesperson? And so I think when we approach the paperwork from both the honor and privilege that it is to be able to say, I'm asking for this care. I'm asking for you to care for me in this way, for the documents when you're alive, the power of attorney and the personal directive, to be able to say, this is how I want to die. And this is how I want to be cared for if I can't speak for myself. And then after death in this way. And I think to be asked is an honor and a privilege, but to be able to say yes or no based on your capacity is also as important. And, one of the spoke of Theo Mitchell and his wife, Catherine, who was my grade 10 biology teacher, and met up with her again at the hair salon, which kind of was wonderful. And also, am I going to a hair salon where an 80-year-old? Yes, I am, because it was a great hair salon. Anyway, we met up again, and she was very nervous about their dying time because they didn't have any kids of their own. And Catherine was, who's gonna be the person speaking for me, and so she put Jamie and I through some rigorous training, I'll tell you, and so understanding that paperwork every year on Theo's birthday, there were 6 of us on Team Catherine, we called it, and she would say, are you still able and willing to stand for me as my agent on my personal directive? Are you? And we would commit as a vow. And it was just a different take on the paperwork that says we are in community and we will care for one another. And it becomes a beautiful, I think, a beautiful way of saying how much you matter to me before we die. And so the paperwork, I think, can take quite a shift from, I hate doing this, to, oh my gosh, this is sacred work.
What's the biggest obstacle that you're experiencing when people, why don't they want to talk about it, right? And I know people who have died without a will, or family who have lost a parent whom they love dearly, and it was like, no, she didn't want a funeral. Like, no one. What is that? What is that obstacle?
Yeah, I think fear for sure. So maybe they didn't have the opportunities to see it done in a way that is healing and beautiful. Um, I think that's probably the biggest thing. Of course, society's, you know, real effort to make us want to live forever and not see death. Lots of history around that, how embalming came to be, how all of those things came to be. And so even, in the hospital, you might see, like when my dad died in 1999, again, so different from how I would do it now. But it's like, okay, we've unplugged the machines. Yes, we're doing a one-time resuscitation. All of that has changed our family so much, just in our choices of how we would want to die. But then being sort of whisked away, instead of being in the room telling the stories, we'd go in one at a time, as he wasn't awake. He had a massive heart attack and lived for about 2 to 3 days. And then, we would take turns going in, instead of it being, my dad was such a family guy in the kitchen. We should have all been there eating salami. And, and so I'm not judging myself. It's just that learning. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is it takes time to learn this. You have to see it differently before you can adapt or change or have a different mind shift. So I think in our work, it's to show people there's a different way, and they'll only see it when they're ready to see it. I just wanted to circle back to, you made me think of one thing you said right at the beginning about this failure, death as a failure, battle language used around it. My mom always, she used to say to me, she'd love it when if I said, oh, I think I failed my test today. Oh, thank God, she'd say. And I never really understood that until now. And it's like, I was lucky to have a lot of success in my life. And she'd say, you're never going to learn anything until you fail. You can get 90s all the time, but that doesn't teach you anything about life. And so when I think of that in the context of death, which I believe was probably her message, was that, as long as you are afraid of it and think of it as failing, you'll never really live that holistic life. And so I think in society, whether it's the beauty world now, whether it's the anti-aging world, I think there's a lot to, if I'll steal that word, battle against. And so really, for us, we can change those who are ready to see something different.
I remember when my mom was ill, there was a point for me where I went, and I was her fierce advocate, because in the healthcare system, the most invisible person is an old woman, frankly, and she wasn't able to speak, blah, blah, blah. But there was a moment for me when I went from being fierce advocacy, keep her safe, what can I do now, to just, okay, I see where this is going. She is, she maybe wasn't actively dying yet, but it was almost like I just had to step back and say, this is happening now. What is my role to ensure that this death can be as beautiful as possible? And Sarah Kerr helped me very, very much with that. But it was a moment from being avenging angel with my sword to like, something is required of me and I don't know what it is, but it will be the most important work I'm ever going to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stephen Jenkinson has great words around that, to know where you are in the moment, like to be able to be as present as possible, because that fight that I have to, I have to fix, I have to make this okay. And to then actually turn around and say, this is the teaching. This is the teaching and the learning and all of that. And it's my place. I'm going to, just share something, Carrie, with you. Our last session with Sarah as a group on council together, you and I were partnered, and we had to look at a stone we had been carrying and see what the message in it was. And you helped me articulate what I think my role is. And I say it, I have it in my Outlook because that's the person I am. But every Friday it pops up and I repeat it, and I think of you. And I printed it out here. I am the reflection of the hidden treasure in each of us and the solid handle you hold on to in the darkest places. I'm ever expanding light, and deeply rooted, fertile darkness. And you really helped me see the darkness in that stone and how beautiful it was, and that's my role, is that those hard places. Yeah.
I love that deeply rooted, fertile darkness. I feel so privileged to have had, which I wouldn't have had. Like younger me did not want to talk about death and dying, thought it was a downer, wouldn't have, and all these things that have made me a better person, right? Like the most difficult death I've had in my life so far is my mother's. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. And now I'm a better person. I met you. I learned to be wise. I learned, I'm not courting death. Like, I'm grateful to have this day
For sure.
every day, but it just, I don't know, made me better. Who would ever guess such a terrible thing would make you a better person?
Yeah. And I just have to think it's about that wholeness, right? It's when you're living a good and happy life, it's half a life. and so it's great. And that's wonderful. And when that door or window starts to open and you see that there's more, then there's a whole life. And that can't match that.
So, do you have any tips for talking about dying with my husband? Right, we do sort of like, oh, when I die, make sure I play this song at my. But to get deeper with that, or even with my daughter, who has this weirdo mom, right? I'm already like, honey, let's talk about. But how can we deepen the conversations so that when it happens, the people left behind aren't like lost or thinking, find a piece of paper months later that said, "Oh, please, whatever you do, don't cremate me." And you've already, like how do we have or lay the groundwork for these kind of conversations so that we're not laying the groundwork for regret?
So first, let's just offer there will always be regret, and there will be unraveling, and there will be the such remorse. Why didn't I? There, that's part of that wholeness. And so, if we can allow that, and then think, Jamie and I use the word integration a lot. So, a lot of people moving through. We certainly don't use move on. But when we're integrating death and grief into our lives on a daily basis, that might mean you're walking with your husband and you see a dead squirrel. Let's move it over to the side and put a flower by it. Yeah, you know what? I think that I would like somebody to do that for me when I die. And so, like you say, the conversations you're having when I die, please do this. Tim and I we use the news a lot. We use what's happening in my family a lot. Of course, it's easy to be lighthearted when nothing is imminent, knowing there's a countdown right happening behind me. But, the lighthearted side of it is a good approach for Tim and I. It's like we'll see something that a relative or something that's on the news. And I'm like, if you do that to me, I will come back and kill you,
I'll haunt you.
Yeah. And so, we lighten it up that way. At the same time, as we're going through his mother's aging, as we went through my mother's aging and dying like you did, it was like, oh, I never want this, or I do want this, or what would it mean to not have a burial? Like, so, the next time you go to a funeral, I always use the opportunities that are present. I'm, going to a funeral and I'm seeing something that I love or don't love. Like you said, I hear a song, play this. If nothing else, play this, because it will remind you of this moment. And wherever I am or however I am on the other side, uh, if I hear it, I'll be smiling. If there's no such thing, you'll be smiling. And so that's what matters, And so it's just trying to learn different ways of speaking about it. I always said Tim is adamant, no funeral for me, kind of thing. And so Jamie and I said, don't worry, we'll plan your funeral. And and I said, I think Tim just doesn't want people talking about him, but he doesn't mind if we're talking about his passions. And so he was a chef. He's a retired chef now. And so we said, yeah, I'll need something like where maybe we go for dinner with family and close friends once a month for a few months to help me grieve with them. So we planned this whole thing of what restaurants we'd go to. And then, you could hear Tim stomping down the stairs going, what restaurants are you picking? And what are you doing with, what menu are you giving? So it's where is the other person? Where can you meet them?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's so important because I know people who say, I do not want a funeral. And to me, that ritual is for the people who are left. So, and you never want to, it's like, well, they said they didn't want a funeral. So creating that creative workaround, like taking what the idea of a funeral and make it into a ritual around grieving is quite lovely. And is it disobeying the person's wishes though?
Well, I can't not talk about it. So I say, this is what's going to help me heal. And I think it's having that conversation. So, very good example too. My mother-in-law, she's turning 90 next weekend. Yay. And so she's lately been on a big no funeral for me. Great. Okay. That's okay. But, Tim and Shauna and I are going to need something. How would this sound if we, and then I'll suggest something. And then the next time, right now she loves it when you read, she can't see anymore. So I'm reading, Tim bought me the Lonely Planet Guide to Death and Burial Practices, and it's beautiful. So I read her one at like one different cultural practice every week, and we pick something from it that I could do for when she dies. And so for me, coming from a very specific cultural or religious practice, I should say, not cultural, around what you do at a funeral, that didn't work for me most of the time. And it works for many people, and that's great. But what does work for me is that integration, that continuation of ways of remembering. And so, last weekend, my mother and I learned about the relationship of marigolds to death and dying. And we're like, oh, I never really liked marigolds, but now I do. So I'm going to plant a marigold every summer. And on your birthday, I will allow it to die.
What's the relationship between marigolds and dying?
Well, what I learned from it was on the Mexican tradition, of course, Day of the Dead. And so they always have marigold wreaths, and it comes from a story, and I'm sorry, I'm terrible on myth, but it was a woman and a man who died, and the woman died, and she said, make me, have marigolds at my funeral, and I will always come then.
So I love this taking meaningful things and crafting ritual that is meaningful for the people.
Yes.
Which is possible, right? That was another
Absolutely.
big learning for me as my mom was dying in hospice. And I was so very grateful that we got there somehow. I mean, and at some point in the dying process, there are miracles everywhere. Like
everywhere.
It is unbelievable. But we were in this place, this very quiet place without overhead beeping. And the process became active, but I knew it was like, oh, I should have a picture of her mother and her father. And I know I can't light a candle in this room, but I can use an LED candle. I can use scent. I can have quiet. I can play the kind of music she loved. Like we could just...
all the senses engaged.
Yeah, all the senses engaged.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have dared. I thought there was a very, there were very rigid medical things about dying, and that those are the rules. And of course, there is in that the body dies, and you don't want to have a person have any distress at all. But there are ways that are human and spiritual that can complement the medical ending, and that was a huge aha. So grateful to have learned that.
For sure. And, for Tim, he doesn't necessarily like to talk about it, but he shows it in many ways. Like in our garden, he built me a piazza. I said, that's where I go to talk to the ancestors. And so all of his work and his labor and his study about how to build lay bricks and all of that was his grief work for whatever his life brings. And, he says he's not very skilled at grieving. I think he is. I think, he does a lot of work around it.
Yeah, so we're back to that idea of the curiosity and the asking questions about grieving and dying is the antidote to fear around it.
Yeah, I really think so. And again, you kind of have to, in many cases, you have to have an experience. It doesn't have to be with the death of a loved one, but an experience of nature dying that you're present to, right? the leaves fall every fall. What does that really mean? How do the cycles of life work? And so you can be present to any of those and have the experience. It doesn't have to wait till someone dies.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I'm a gardener. So fall is very much a reflective, sad time, right? Like pulling up all the plants I worked so hard to nurture. Yeah. Gardening is, or nature is, oh my goodness. Nature is amazing. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please tell your friends.